I watched him enter the room, and suddenly the air felt heavier, like even the walls knew who he was before I did. Conversations didn't stop, but they softened, voices dropping just enough to avoid his attention. And I should have noticed that, should have understood that no ordinary man could shift a room like that without saying a word, but I didn't. Not yet, because to me, he was just another man in a perfectly tailored suit standing 6 feet away under low amber lights, his presence calm, controlled, almost too still, like a storm that had already decided where it would land. And I kept walking, balancing my tray, pretending everything was normal even as my instincts whispered that it wasn't, that something about him didn't belong in the same world as me, not in my simple routine of long shifts and quiet nights and cheap coffee that had gone cold hours ago. But then he looked at me, and everything slowed. Not dramatically, not like in the movies, just enough for me to feel it in my chest. A pause, a shift, like the moment before something breaks. His eyes didn't scan me the way other men did, didn't linger or judge. They studied, calculated, like he was trying to understand why I wasn't reacting the way everyone else was, because I wasn't stepping back, wasn't lowering my gaze. I was just standing there, confused, unaware that I had already made a mistake by not being afraid. Someone beside me whispered his name under their breath, Adrian Blackwood, like saying it too loud might carry consequences. And that's when it clicked, not fully, but enough for my pulse to change, enough for me to realize I had walked into something I didn't understand, something bigger, darker, something that didn't include people like me. But it was too late to leave, too late to pretend I hadn't been noticed, because he took a step forward, slow, deliberate, and the room adjusted around him like gravity had shifted. And for the first time that night, I felt it, not fear exactly, but awareness, sharp and undeniable, that this man didn't just exist in the world. He controlled a version of it that most people never saw, and somehow, without meaning to, without choosing it, I had stepped directly into it. And instead of running, instead of looking away like everyone else, I held his gaze for 1 second too long. And in that single second, something changed, not just in him, but in me, because I realized I wasn't looking at a monster, not yet. I was looking at a man who expected fear and found none, and that made me dangerous in a way I didn't understand, and him curious in a way he couldn't ignore. He did not speak right away, and somehow that silence said more than anything else could have, because no one interrupted it, no one dared to fill it. Not even the music dared to rise back to its normal volume. And I realized then that this was not just respect. It was something heavier, something learned, something practiced, like people here knew exactly how far to go and exactly when to stop. And he was the reason why. Adrian Blackwood stood in front of me close enough that I could notice the smallest details, the precise line of his jaw, the faint crease between his brows as if he was constantly calculating something no one else could see. And yet there was no rush in him, no wasted movement, just control, the kind that does not need to prove itself. "You should not be here," he said finally, his voice low and even, not loud, not threatening, but it carried anyway, cutting through the space between us like it belonged there. And I blinked because that was not what I expected, not anger, not accusation, just a statement, simple and direct. "I work here," I replied before I could stop myself, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. And for a second I wondered if I had just made things worse, if speaking back was crossing a line I could not see. But his expression did not change, not exactly. Something shifted behind his eyes, subtle but real, like I had given him an answer he did not anticipate. His gaze dropped briefly to the tray in my hands, then back to my face. And I felt it again, that strange pause, like he was measuring something. Not my appearance, not my words, something deeper, something about the way I stood there without stepping back. "People who belong here do not look at me the way you just did," he said. And there was no arrogance in it, just fact. And I frowned slightly because I did not understand the rule I had apparently broken. "How are they supposed to look at you?" I asked. And the moment the words left my mouth I heard it, the quiet intake of breath from someone nearby, like I had just done something reckless without realizing it. But I did not take it back. I could not, because I needed to understand what was happening, what made this man so different that an entire room adjusted itself around him. Adrian held my gaze a second longer, and for the first time there was something else there, not irritation, not amusement, something closer to interest, like I had just turned a page in a book he had already read 100 times and suddenly found a line he did not remember. With caution, he said, and that single word landed heavier than anything else he could have said, because it was not a warning, not entirely. It was almost advice, and I felt it settle. Somewhere deep in my chest, a quiet acknowledgement that I had stepped into something real, something that had rules I did not know and consequences I had not imagined. I should have walked away then. I should have nodded, lowered my eyes, done what everyone else in that room seemed to understand instinctively. But I did not, because something about him did not feel like the danger everyone else believed it was, not in that moment, not in the way he spoke or the way he watched me like he was trying to figure out a puzzle that refused to fit. And instead of stepping back, I asked one more question. What happens if I do not? And that was it. That was the moment everything shifted again, because the room did not just go quiet. It held its breath, waiting for his answer, and Adrian did not look away this time, did not hesitate. He just studied me like he had already made a decision I was not aware of yet. And when he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost thoughtful. Then you stay. And somehow, that felt more dangerous than anything else he could have said. No one moved after he said it. And I felt it, that invisible shift in the room, settling into something new, something heavier, like a line had been drawn, and I had stepped across it without realizing there was no way back. My fingers tightened slightly around the tray, but I did not lower my gaze. I could feel eyes on me from every direction now, not curious anymore, not indifferent, something closer to disbelief, like they were watching someone make a mistake they could not stop. And maybe they were right. Maybe I should have stepped back, should have said something safe and simple and forgettable. But instead I asked, stay for what? And this time there was no quiet reaction from the room, no sharp inhale, just stillness, the kind that comes when people are waiting for something they already know is coming. Adrian tilted his head just slightly, not annoyed, not impressed, just considering, like he was deciding how much truth I could handle. You ask too many questions for someone who does not understand where she is, he said, and I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was the first honest thing anyone had said to me all night. Then maybe you should explain it, I replied, and that was it. That was the second mistake, or maybe the second choice, because this time something did change in him, subtle but real, the faintest tightening in his expression, not anger, something closer to recognition, like he had seen this before somewhere. Someone who did not follow the rules because they did not believe in them. His gaze held mine for a long second, long enough for me to feel the weight of it, not threatening, not kind, just present, like standing too close to something powerful enough to change direction at any moment. And then he stepped closer, not enough to invade my space, just enough that I could hear him without anyone else needing to. This is not a place for explanations, he said quietly. This is a place where people already know. And I realized then that he was not talking about the room. Not really. He was talking about the world behind it, the one I had accidentally walked into, the one that did not need introductions because it did not expect outsiders to survive long enough to ask questions. Something in my chest tightened at that thought. Not fear exactly, something sharper, awareness, because for the first time I understood that staying here was not just a moment. It was a decision, and decisions had consequences I could not see yet. I should have left then. I knew that. I felt it in the quiet tension around us, in the way no one interrupted, no one stepped forward. Like even the people closest to him would not cross whatever invisible line we were standing on. But instead of stepping back, I set the tray down on the nearest table, slow, deliberate, my hands steady even though my pulse was not. And when I looked back at him, I did not soften my voice. Then I guess I will learn, I said. And for the first time since this started, something real flickered in his expression, not surprise, not disbelief, something deeper, something almost dangerous in a different way, because it was not about control anymore. It was about interest, and I realized too late that this was not about whether I stayed or left. It was about the fact that he had decided I would stay the moment I did not walk away. And the worst part was, I was not entirely sure I wanted to leave anymore. The moment I said it, I felt it settle into the room like something irreversible, not loud, not dramatic, just final, like a door closing somewhere I could not see. And Adrian did not respond right away, which somehow made it worse, because silence from him was never empty. It was always deliberate, always carrying weight. His eyes stayed on mine, steady, unblinking, as if he was waiting for me to change my mind, to step back, to become like everyone else in that room. But I did not, and I think that was the exact moment he stopped seeing me as a mistake and started seeing me as something else entirely. You do not learn this world by standing in it, he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful, and for a second I thought that was his way of dismissing me, of ending whatever strange moment we had created. But then he turned slightly, just enough to gesture without looking away, and suddenly the space around us shifted again. People moved without being told. Conversations resumed, but at a distance, like we had been quietly separated from the rest of the room, not isolated, but set apart. And that was when I realized something I should have understood earlier. Nothing around him happened by accident. Every movement, every pause, every silence, it was all part of something controlled, something intentional. And somehow I had just been pulled into it without knowing the rules. You said you would learn, he continued. And now there was something sharper in his tone, not harsh, just certain, like he had already decided what that meant. So you start by listening. I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was the simplest instruction I had heard all night. And yet it felt like the hardest one to follow, because listening here did not mean hearing words. It meant understanding everything that was not being said. The glances, the pauses, the way people positioned themselves around him like they were orbiting something they could not escape. I glanced around for a second, just long enough to notice the details I had missed before. The way no one stood directly behind him. The way every interaction stopped just short of crossing an invisible line. The way even confidence in this room had limits, except for him. He did not have limits. Not here. And that realization should have made me step back, should have reminded me exactly how far out of place I was. But instead it did something else. It made me curious in a way I could not ignore, because for all the control, for all the power that seemed to surround him, there was something else there too. Something quieter, something that did not fit as neatly into the image everyone else believed. And before I could stop myself, I said it. You do not look like someone who needs to be listened to. And the second the words left my mouth, I knew I had crossed another line. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. Because this time the reaction was not in the room. It was in him, subtle, almost invisible, but real. His expression did not harden, did not shift into anger or warning. It changed in a way I could not fully explain, like I had just said something that reached further than I intended, something that landed somewhere deeper than surface-level control. And for the first time since I met him, Adrian did not answer right away. He just looked at me. Really looked, like he was seeing something he had not expected to find. And when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before, quieter in a way that did not match the power everyone else saw. Maybe that is because you are the only one who is not trying to survive me. And I felt that sentence settle into my chest before I could understand it, because suddenly this was not about the room anymore, not about where I stood or what I had walked into. It was about him, about the space he occupied and the distance everyone else kept, and the fact that somehow, without planning it, without meaning to, I had stepped into that distance and refused to leave. And for the first time that night, I realized something I could not ignore. This was not just his world anymore. Not entirely, because the moment I stopped being afraid, something in it had already started to change. His words did not feel like a warning. And that was what unsettled me the most, because everything about him suggested control, power, distance. Yet what he said carried something else, something quieter, something almost honest, and I did not know what to do with that. So I did the only thing I seemed capable of doing around him. I stayed exactly where I was and let the silence stretch just long enough to feel it settle between us. You make it sound like people are afraid of you, I said. Finally, my voice softer now, not challenging, just observing. And for the first time since this started, I saw it. Not in his expression, not in the way he stood, but in the smallest shift of his gaze, like I had named something that did not need to be spoken out loud. People are careful, he replied. And there it was again, that precision, that choice of words that avoided the truth without denying it. Careful is another word for afraid, I said, and I did not mean it as an accusation, not really, but it landed anyway. I could feel it in the way the air around us seemed to tighten, not from the room, from him, just slightly. Just enough to notice if you were paying attention. And I was. I was paying attention to everything now. The way he breathed, slow and controlled. The way his shoulders never tensed even when something unexpected happened. The way his eyes never left mine for long. Like he was trying to decide whether I was a problem or something else entirely. "You are not careful," he said, and there was something different in his voice now. Not colder, not warmer, just more focused, like the conversation had shifted into something neither of us had planned. "No, I am not," I admitted, because there was no point pretending otherwise. Not here, not with him. And for a moment neither of us spoke. The noise of the room existing somewhere far behind us, distant and unimportant. Because whatever this was, it was happening here, in this space that had somehow become separate from everything else. And then he did something I did not expect. He stepped back, just one step, but it was enough to change the balance between us, enough to give me space I had not realized he was holding, and I felt it immediately. The difference, like I could breathe again without the weight of his presence pressing so close. "Most people spend their entire lives trying to stay out of my way," he said, his tone quieter now, almost reflective, and I could tell he was not saying it to impress me. He was stating a fact, something that had shaped the way he moved through the world, something that had built the distance I had just stepped into without permission. "And you do not?" he added, and there was no question in it, just certainty. I thought about that for a second, about all the ways I probably should have reacted differently, should have stepped back, should have lowered my voice, should have avoided this entire situation from the beginning. But none of those things felt right, not in this moment, not standing here in front of him. "Maybe that is because I do not know what I am supposed to be afraid of," I said, and that was the truth, simple and unfiltered. Because fear needs understanding, it needs context, and I had neither. I had only instinct, and my instinct was not telling me to run, it was telling me to stay, to figure this out, to understand the man everyone else avoided without question. Adrian watched me for a long second after that, longer than before, like he was measuring something that did not have clear edges, and when he finally spoke, his voice had changed again, not softer, not harder, just different. Like something had shifted beneath the surface. "Fear is not always loud," he said. "Sometimes it looks like respect, sometimes it looks like distance, and sometimes it looks like silence." And I felt that sentence settle somewhere deeper than the others, because suddenly I understood something I had missed before. This was not just about power. It was about isolation, about a world where people did not come close because they did not know how, or did not dare to try. And without thinking, without planning it, I took a small step forward, closing the distance he had just created, not dramatically, just enough to matter. And when I spoke, my voice was steady in a way I did not question anymore. "Then maybe they have been wrong about you." And that was it. That was the moment everything shifted again, because this time he did not hide it completely. This time I saw it, clear and undeniable. The smallest fracture in the control he held so tightly. Not weakness, not vulnerability. Just something human breaking through the surface. And I realized then that this was no longer about whether I belonged in his world. It was about the fact that I had already changed something in it, and neither of us knew what that meant yet. For a brief second after I said it, the world did not move, not around us, not within him. Just a quiet pause that felt too intentional to be accidental. And I realized I had crossed something again, not a visible boundary, but something deeper, something that people in his world probably never touched. And yet here I was, standing in front of him, saying things no one else seemed willing to say, and I should have felt exposed, should have felt the weight of that mistake pressing down on me. But instead I felt something else, something steadier, like I had finally stepped into a truth that did not depend on fear to exist. Adrian did not respond immediately, and that silence was different this time, not controlled, not calculated, just present. Like he was deciding whether to accept what I had said or reject it entirely. His gaze did not leave mine. But there was something behind it now, something I could not name at first, until I realized it was not directed at me. It was directed inward, like I had forced him to look at something he had not planned to face tonight. Or maybe not in a long time. People are rarely wrong about things that keep them alive, he said finally, his voice low, measured, but not dismissive, and I understood what he meant. That in his world, caution was not weakness, it was survival. That distance was not coldness, it was protection. And for a moment I wondered if I had misunderstood everything. If what I saw as isolation was actually choice, something he built intentionally, something he needed, but then I noticed it again. That small fracture, that quiet space between what he said and what he meant, and I knew there was more to it than that. Maybe, I said slowly, choosing my words this time. But that does not mean it is the only way to live. And the second the sentence left my mouth, I felt it, not from the room, but from him, a shift, subtle but undeniable, like I had just touched something real beneath everything else, something that did not belong to the version of him the world saw. And for the first time since this started, Adrian looked away, not for long, just a second, just enough for me to notice. And when his gaze returned to mine, it was sharper, more focused, like he had made a decision I could not see yet. You speak like someone who has never had to choose between what is right and what keeps you alive, he said, and there was no accusation in it, just observation, but it landed anyway, because for a moment I did not have an answer, not a clear one, not one that fit into the world he was describing, and I realized then how different our lives must have been, how different the rules were, and yet, even with that understanding, I did not step back, I did not soften, because something in me refused to accept that survival had to come at the cost of everything else. Maybe that is because I have not lived your life, I admitted, my voice quieter now, but steady, but I have seen what happens when people stop choosing what is right, and it does not look like living to me. And that was it. That was the moment the distance between us changed again, not physically, but something shifted in the space we shared, something that made this feel less like a confrontation and more like something else entirely. Something neither of us had expected to find here. Adrian studied me for a long second, longer than before, like he was trying to decide whether I was naive or something more complicated. And then he did something I had not seen him do yet, something small but undeniable. He exhaled, slow, controlled, but real, like he was releasing something he had been holding without realizing it. You think this is a choice, he said quietly, and there was something different in his voice now. Something closer to truth than anything else he had said tonight, and I felt that shift settle into my chest before I could respond, because suddenly this was not about him explaining his world to me. It was about him questioning it, even if only for a second, even if only because I was standing here refusing to see it the way everyone else did. And I realized then, with a clarity I could not ignore, this was no longer just a moment that would pass when I walked away. This was the beginning of something that would change both of us, whether we wanted it to or not. The way he said it lingered longer than anything else, not loud, not forceful, just quiet and certain, and it made me realize that whatever this was, whatever space we had stepped into, it was no longer just a conversation. It was something deeper, something that was beginning to shift beneath both of us whether we acknowledged it or not. I watched him carefully now, not with confusion like before, but with intent, because I was starting to understand that every word mattered here. Every pause, every glance, nothing was accidental. And if I was going to stay in this moment, I needed to see it for what it was, not what I wanted it to be. Then maybe it should be, I said. And the words came out softer than before, not defiant, not challenging, just honest. And that honesty felt different, like it carried more weight than anything I had said earlier. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, not even in disagreement, but in focus, like I had just presented something he could not dismiss as easily as before. You believe that, he said, and it was not a question. It was an evaluation, like he was measuring whether I truly understood what I was saying or if I was just speaking from a place that had never been tested. I held his gaze without hesitation, because this was not about proving something to him anymore. It was about not losing something in myself. Yes, I said, simply, and for a second I thought that would be the end of it, that he would dismiss it, move on, return to whatever world he had been controlling before I interrupted it. But he did not. Instead, he took a step to the side, not away from me, just enough to shift the angle between us, and I followed his movement instinctively, my eyes catching the direction of his gaze. That was when I saw it. Not clearly, not all at once, but enough to understand. A group of men across the room, their posture tense in a way that did not match the polished environment, their attention too focused, too deliberate, like they were waiting for something that had not happened yet. I felt it then, that subtle change in the air, the kind that does not announce itself, but makes everything feel slightly off, like the room had tilted by half a degree and only a few people noticed. What is that? I asked quietly, not taking my eyes off them. Adrian did not answer right away, and I knew that silence now. It was not hesitation. It was calculation, the kind that happened in real time. Assessing, adjusting, deciding, people who do not belong. He said finally, and there was something different in his voice now. Not colder, not louder, just sharper, like the focus I had seen in. His eyes had extended into everything around him. I should have stepped back then, should have let that moment pull me out of whatever strange connection we had created, but instead I stayed, because something in me refused to turn away now that I could see it, refused to pretend this world did not exist just because it was easier. What happens next? I asked, and this time I knew I was asking the right question, because Adrian looked at me differently, not surprised, not curious, just aware, like I had finally stepped into the part of his world that did not come with explanations. We adapt, he said, and the simplicity of it made my chest tighten, because it was not reassurance, it was not comfort, it was truth, and I realized then that this was what he meant earlier. This was the choice he said did not exist, because in his world, there was no pause, no time to question what was right or wrong, only time to respond, to survive, and for the first time since this began, I felt it. Not fear exactly, but clarity, sharp and undeniable. That staying here meant becoming part of something I did not fully understand yet. And still, I did not move. I did not step back, because somewhere, between the moment I walked into this room and now, something had changed, not just in him, but in me. And when I looked at him again, really looked, I saw it. That same awareness reflected back at me, like he understood exactly what I had just realized. And instead of telling me to leave, instead of pushing me away from something I was not ready for, he did something else entirely, something I had not expected. He stayed right where he was, and for the first time, it felt like we were standing on the same side of something neither of us had named yet. The shift did not explode into chaos. It never did in his world. It unfolded quietly, like a ripple beneath the surface that only a few people were trained to notice. And now, somehow, I was one of them. I could feel it in the way conversations continued but no longer mattered, in the way certain people adjusted their positions without being told, in the way Adrian's attention sharpened without a single visible command. And I realized this was what control actually looked like, not loud, not aggressive, just absolute. He did not need to raise his voice because everything around him was already listening. Stay close, he said, under his breath, and the fact that he said it to me, not as an order, but as something closer to instinct, made something in my chest tighten in a way I could not ignore. I should have questioned it, should have stepped away, but instead I found myself doing exactly what he said, not out of fear, but because for the first time since I walked into this room, I trusted that he knew something I did not. The group across the room shifted slightly, their attention no longer subtle, and even without understanding the full picture, I could feel the tension building, not visible, not obvious, but present, like a storm gathering just beyond the edge of perception. What are they waiting for? I asked quietly, keeping my voice steady even as my awareness sharpened. Adrian did not look at me when he answered, his eyes fixed on the room, tracking movement in a way that felt almost precise. An opening, he said, and the simplicity of it made my stomach tighten, because it meant this was not random. It was intentional, planned. And for a brief second, I wondered how many layers of this world existed beneath the surface I had just begun to see. And then something else happened, not from them, but from him. Adrian shifted slightly, positioning himself just enough that I was no longer directly exposed to the rest of the room. Not obvious, not noticeable to anyone who was not paying attention. But I felt it immediately, the subtle barrier he created without making it known. And that was when it hit me. He was protecting me. Not dramatically, not in a way that drew attention, but in the smallest, most controlled way possible. And the realization caught me off guard, because this was the same man everyone in this room treated like something untouchable, something to avoid. And yet here he was, adjusting his world by inches to make space for me in it. Why? I asked before I could stop myself. And this time he did look at me, just briefly, just long enough for me to see something I had not seen before. Not control, not calculation, something closer to choice. Because you stayed, he said simply, and that answer settled deeper than anything else he had said, because it was not about obligation, not about power, It was about the fact that I had stepped into his world and refused to run, and that had changed something in the way he saw me. The tension in the room tightened again, pulling my attention back to the present. The group had moved slightly closer now, not enough to draw attention, but enough that I could feel the difference, the space between them and us shrinking in a way that felt deliberate. And for the first time, I understood what he meant earlier. This was not about right or wrong. This was about responding, adapting, surviving in a world where hesitation had consequences. What do we do? I asked quietly, and I knew now that the we was intentional, that I was no longer standing outside of this moment. Adrian's gaze flicked back to the room, then to me, and there was no hesitation in his answer. We do not react, he said. We decide. And something in the way he said it shifted everything again, because suddenly this was not just his world I had stepped into. It was a choice I was actively making, a line I was choosing to cross. And as I stood there beside him, feeling the weight of that decision settle into place, I realized something I could not ignore. I was no longer just observing his darkness. I was standing inside it, and I had not turned away. The moment he said it, I felt the difference settle into my chest. Not like fear, not like hesitation, but like something sharper, something clearer, because deciding meant responsibility. It meant there was no room left for pretending I did not understand where I was or what this could become. And for the first time since I walked into this room, I became aware of my own breathing, steady but intentional, matching the rhythm of everything around me that now felt too precise to be accidental. Adrian did not move much, but I could tell he was tracking everything, the smallest shifts, the subtle changes in posture across the room, the quiet signals I would have missed an hour ago. And I realized that this was what separated him from everyone else, not just power, but awareness, the kind that never turned off, the kind that shaped every decision before it was made. The group across the room had spread slightly now, not gathering attention, but positioning themselves in a way that felt strategic, controlled, like they were mapping out space instead of occupying it. And suddenly the room felt smaller, not physically, but in the way my focus narrowed, like everything unnecessary had faded into the background, leaving only what mattered. Do you always know what is about to happen? I asked quietly, not out of curiosity anymore, but because I needed to understand the rules I had stepped into. Adrian's answer came without hesitation. Not always, he said, but I know when something is wrong. And that answer felt more honest than anything else, because it admitted uncertainty while still holding control. I followed his gaze again, trying to see what he saw, trying to understand the difference between normal and wrong in a world I had only just begun to recognize. And then I noticed it. Not obvious, not dramatic, just a slight hesitation in movement from one of the men, a delay that did not match the rhythm of everything else. And it stood out because everything here moved with purpose, except that. What does that mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It means they are not as prepared as they think they are, Adrian replied, and there was something almost certain in his tone now, like he had already moved past observation and into decision, and I felt it again, that shift, not around us, but within him, like a switch had been flipped, not visible but undeniable. The calm did not disappear. It deepened, became something more focused, more deliberate, and for the first time, I understood what power actually looked like in this world. It was not loud. It did not demand attention. It controlled outcomes before they were visible. What happens if they make the wrong move? I asked, and this time I already knew the answer would not be simple. Adrian looked at me then, fully, his gaze steady in a way that felt different from before, not distant, not calculating, just clear. Then they learn, he said, and there was something final in the way he said it, something that told me this was not a world that explained itself twice. I nodded slowly, not because I fully understood, but because I was beginning to accept that understanding would come in pieces, in moments like this, not all at once. The tension shifted again. The group hesitated, just for a second, and that second was enough. Enough for Adrian to move. Not quickly, not dramatically, just a step. A small adjustment that seemed insignificant until I realized what it did. It changed the angle of everything. The distance, the lines of sight, the way the room connected, and suddenly the group across the room no longer looked in control, not completely, because whatever they had planned no longer aligned the way they expected. How did you do that? I asked, unable to stop myself. and for the first time, there was the faintest hint of something almost like amusement in his expression, not because it was funny, but because I had finally asked the right question. I did not. He said quietly, "They did." And that answer stayed with me, because it meant everything I was seeing was not just about what he controlled. It was about what others failed to understand. And as I stood there beside him, watching the shift unfold in a way that felt almost invisible to everyone else, I realized something I could not ignore. This was not just his darkness. It was a system, a structure, something built over time, and somehow, without meaning to, I was learning how to see it, and the more I saw, the harder it became to pretend I did not belong in this moment anymore. What he said should have reassured me, but it did the opposite, because now I understood that nothing here happened by chance, not their hesitation, not his movement, not even my presence. Everything was part of a pattern I had only just begun to see, and the deeper I looked, the more I realized how much I had missed before. The room had not returned to normal, not really. It only appeared that way on the surface. Beneath it, something had shifted permanently, like a balance had been adjusted. By a fraction no one could measure except the people who knew where to look, and Adrian was one of those people. I watched him now with a different awareness, no longer trying to understand him as a person, but as part of this system. This structure he seemed to move through effortlessly, like it was built around him rather than something he had stepped into. The group across the room had slowed, their movements less certain now, less aligned, and I could feel it even from here. The way their confidence had changed into something more cautious, more reactive. They were adjusting, but not fast enough, not precisely enough, and that difference was everything. "They are recalculating," I said quietly, not even sure if I was speaking to him or thinking out loud. But he heard me. "I know," he replied, and there was something in his voice that felt almost approving, not openly, not in a way that invited acknowledgement, but enough for me to realize I was starting to see what he saw. The realization should have unsettled me more than it did, but instead it grounded me, made everything sharper, clearer, like the world had narrowed into something I could finally focus on without distraction. "What happens if they walk away?" I asked, and this time I understood that walking away was not failure. It was strategy. Sometimes the right decision was not to act at all. Adrian considered that for a moment, not because he did not know the answer, but because he was deciding how much to say. "Then they leave with less than they came for," he said, and I understood that too. That in this world, success was not always about gaining something. Sometimes it was about not losing everything. The group shifted again, one of them stepping back just slightly, enough to signal something to the others, and I felt it. That subtle change in direction, not retreat, but reconsideration, like they were beginning to understand the position they were in. And for a brief second, I wondered if this was the end of it, if whatever had been building would dissolve into nothing more than a quiet adjustment. But then Adrian moved again, just a small step forward this time, almost imperceptible, and yet it changed everything. The group froze for half a second, just enough to confirm what I had started to understand. They were watching him, not the room, not the situation, him, and that meant he was not just part of this system, he was the center of it. "How do they know?" I asked softly, and this time my voice carried something new. Not confusion, not curiosity, but realization, because I already knew the answer, I just needed to hear it. "They do not," Adrian said, his gaze still fixed across the room. "They react," and that single sentence clarified everything, because reacting meant they were already behind, already responding to something that had been decided before they noticed it. And in that moment, I understood the difference between power and control. Power demanded attention, but control shaped outcomes before anyone else realized they had changed. The tension eased slightly, not completely, but enough to signal that whatever had been building was shifting into something else, something less immediate, less certain. The group began to reposition, slower now, more cautious, like they were trying to find a new angle that no longer existed. And for the first time since this started, I saw uncertainty in them, not fear, but doubt, and that was enough. Enough for me to understand that this moment was no longer about what they had planned. It was about how they would adapt to something they had not anticipated. I glanced at Adrian again, really looked this time, and what I saw was not just control, not just awareness. It was something else, something that did not fit into the version of him the room believed in, because beneath everything, Beneath the precision and the calculation, there was choice, not just in what he did, but in what he allowed. And suddenly I realized something that changed everything again. He was not just managing this situation, he was shaping it, deciding how far it would go, how it would end, and for reasons I could not fully explain yet, he had chosen not to escalate it, not to push it further, and that choice, quiet and controlled as it was, told me more about him than anything else I had seen tonight, because it meant that even here, even in this world, he was not defined entirely by the darkness around him. And as the tension slowly began to settle into something less immediate, I felt it again, that shift, not in the room, not in him, but in me, because I was no longer just watching this unfold. I was understanding it, and the more I understood, the more I realized that leaving this place would not make it disappear, because something in me had already changed, something that would not let me go back to seeing the world the way I had before. The room did not return to what it was before. It never could, because once something shifts at that level, it does not reset. It settles into a new balance, quieter, less visible, but permanent. And I could feel that now in the way everything moved again, smoother on the surface, but different underneath, like a current had changed direction and only a few of us knew it. The group across the room had stopped advancing entirely, their posture no longer sharp, no longer pressing forward, but not fully retreating either. They were waiting, but this time not for an opening, for confirmation. And that was when I understood something else. They were no longer testing the room. They were testing him, and Adrian knew it. I could see it in the way his focus did not waver, the way he stood exactly where he needed to be, not dominating the space, but defining it. And for the first time since this started, I felt something shift inside me that was not just awareness, it was alignment, like I was no longer trying to keep up with what was happening. I was part of it. Even if I did not fully understand how, they are deciding whether to stay or leave, I said quietly. And this time I did not question my own voice, because I could see it clearly now, the hesitation, the calculation, the weight of a decision that would determine how this ended. Adrian glanced at me, just briefly, and there was something different in that look. Not surprise, not curiosity, something closer to recognition, like I had crossed another threshold without realizing it. Yes, he said, and the simplicity of that answer felt heavier than before, because now I understood what it meant. Staying was not just presence, it was commitment. Leaving was not just retreat, it was acceptance, and neither option was simple in a world like this. The group shifted again, one of them stepping slightly forward before stopping, like they were waiting for something that had not happened yet, and I felt it, that final moment, the one where everything balanced on a single decision. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise. What would make them leave? I asked, my voice lower now, not because I was afraid, but because this felt like something that did not need volume. Adrian did not answer immediately, and I realized he was not deciding what to say, he was deciding what to do. And that difference mattered. Everything in this world seemed to come down to that: action over explanation, decision over reaction. And then he moved, not toward them, not away from me, just forward, one step, controlled, deliberate, and the effect was immediate, not visible to most, but undeniable to anyone who was paying attention. The group stopped completely, their uncertainty turning into something clearer, something final, and I felt it in the air. The shift from possibility to conclusion. They understood, not through words, not through confrontation, but through position, through presence, through the silent confirmation that whatever they were considering would not end the way they wanted it to. They will leave now, Adrian said quietly. And this time it was not a prediction, it was a certainty. I watched as it happened, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The group began to withdraw, not rushed, not obvious, but definite, their formation loosening, their focus breaking, like the decision had already been made before they physically moved. And just like that, the tension that had filled the room began to dissolve, not completely, but enough that it no longer held everything in place. Conversations resumed more naturally, movements returned to their original rhythm, but I knew it was not the same. It would never be the same, because something had been tested here, something had been proven, and I had seen it. I had understood it. I turned back to Adrian, my mind still processing everything that had just unfolded, and for a moment I did not know what to say. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much, Too many realizations settling into place at once. You did not stop them, I said finally. And it was not an accusation, not even a question, just an observation, because I had expected something more direct, something more visible. And yet what he had done was something else entirely. He had changed the outcome without ever forcing it. Adrian looked at me then, fully, his expression calm, controlled. But there was something else there now, something that had not been there before this moment. Stopping them would have required them to act, he said. And I felt that answer land deeper than the others, because it meant everything I had seen tonight was not about dominance. It was about understanding the exact point where action became unnecessary. And as I stood there beside him, the room slowly returning to its surface normal, I realized something that I could not ignore anymore. I was no longer standing outside his world trying to understand it. I was standing inside it, seeing it clearly, and the part of me that should have been afraid, that should have stepped back and walked away, was no longer there. Because somewhere along the way, without realizing it, I had stopped trying to survive his darkness and started seeing through it. The room moved on, but I did not completely, because something inside me had not settled the way everything else had. It lingered, that quiet understanding that had taken shape piece by piece throughout the night, and now refused to disappear just because the moment had passed. I looked around again, really looked this time, not as someone out of place, not as someone observing from the outside, but as someone who had seen what existed beneath the surface. And it was different now. The same lights, the same conversations, the same polished calm, but I could see the structure underneath it, the invisible lines, the unspoken rules, the way everything was connected in ways that did not need to be explained. And for the first time, I did not feel lost in it. I felt aware, and that awareness changed everything. You are thinking too much. Adrian's voice cut through my thoughts, low and steady, not critical, just certain. And I turned back to him, surprised at how easily I adjusted to his presence now, how natural it felt to stand beside him instead of apart from him. Maybe, I admitted, but I think I finally understand. And that was the truth. Not complete understanding, not everything, but enough to see the difference between what I thought this world was and what it actually was. Adrian watched me for a moment, his expression unreadable in the way I had come to expect, but there was something quieter there now, something that did not feel as distant as before. Understanding does not mean belonging, he said, and the word should have created distance again, should have reminded me exactly where I stood in relation to him and everything around us. But they did not land that way. Not anymore, maybe not, I said, my voice calm, steady, but it does mean I am not afraid of it. And there it was, the shift again, subtle but undeniable, not in the room, not even in him at first, but in the space between us, because this time the statement did not challenge him. It did not question him. It simply existed, and that made it stronger than anything I had said before. Adrian's gaze held mine, longer than usual, like he was searching for something he had not yet decided to accept. Fear is not the only reason people stay away, he said, and there was something different in his tone now, something that carried more weight than the words themselves. I know, I replied quietly, because now I did. I understood that distance could come from many places, not just fear, but caution, respect, even self-preservation, and yet none of those reasons felt strong enough to make me step back. Not anymore, because what I had seen tonight was not just darkness, it was control, choice, and something else I was still trying to define. Then why are you still here? He asked, and this time it was not a statement. It was a real question, the first one he had asked me that did not already contain the answer, and I felt it settle in my chest before I spoke. Because the truth mattered now in a way it had not before. I could have said anything, could have given a safe answer, something simple, something that fit into the version of the world he expected, but I did not, because this moment deserved more than that, because I wanted to understand you, I said. And the words felt heavier than anything else I had spoken tonight. Not dramatic, not forced, just real. And for the first time since I met him, Adrian did not hide his reaction completely. It was small, almost invisible, but I saw it. That pause, that fraction of a second where control met something unexpected, and it did not disappear right away. It stayed, just long enough for me to realize that this was not a question he was used to hearing, not in this world, not from someone standing this close without fear or expectation. You think understanding changes anything? he said quietly, and I could hear it now. Not doubt, not dismissal, something closer to curiosity, something he had not allowed himself before this moment. I held his gaze, steady, certain in a way I had not been at the beginning of the night. Maybe not everything, I admitted, but it changes something, and I did not need to explain what. Because I could feel it, that shift, not just in me, not just in him, but in the space we shared, like something had been set in motion that would not stop just because the night ended. And as I stood there, no longer questioning whether I belonged in this moment, I realized something I could not ignore. I had not just walked into his darkness, I had chosen to stay, and for the first time, it felt like he was beginning to understand why. He did not answer me right away, and this time the silence felt different from all the others, not controlled, not calculated, just real, like something in him had paused without permission, and I realized that whatever I had said had not just reached him, it had stayed there, unsettled, unprocessed, like a question he was not used to carrying. I held his gaze without pushing, without filling the space. Because for the first time I understood that this was not about forcing a response, it was about allowing one. And Adrian, the man who seemed to decide everything before it happened, was now standing in a moment he had not planned. "You think you can understand something like this?" he said finally, his voice quieter than before, not dismissive, not challenging, just uncertain in a way that did not fit the rest of him. And I felt that difference immediately, because it was not weakness, it was honesty, and that made it heavier than anything else he had shown me tonight. "I do not think I can understand all of it," I replied, steady, certain, "but I think I can understand you." And the moment the words left my mouth, I felt it, that shift again, deeper this time, not just in the space between us, but in the way he looked at me, like I was no longer something unexpected or temporary, but something he had to consider, something that did not fit into the structure he had built, but could not be ignored either. The room around us continued as if nothing had changed, conversations flowing, glasses clinking softly, the surface of normal returning completely. But I knew better now. I knew that beneath it, something had already been rewritten, something subtle but permanent. Adrian exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting for just a second before returning to mine, and when it did, it carried something I had not seen before. Not control, not distance, but awareness, not of the room, not of the people around us, but of me. "You should not stay here," he said, and the words should have pushed me away, should have drawn a line that I could not cross, but they did not feel like a command. They felt like a choice he was offering me, one that came with understanding instead of force. "I know," I said quietly, and that was the truth. I knew exactly what staying meant now. I knew the weight of it, the consequences, the way it would change things I had not even considered yet. But I also knew something else, something just as important. "I am not here because I have to be," I added, my voice steady in a way that did not waver anymore. "I am here because I chose to be." And that was it. That was the moment everything settled into place, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet alignment of everything that had been building since the second I walked into this room. Adrian did not look away, did not interrupt. He just watched me, really watched me, like he was seeing something that had not existed in his world before, something that did not follow the rules he understood, and for the first time, he did not try to control it, did not try to define it. He let it exist, and that changed everything, because in that moment, the distance that had defined him, that had separated him from everyone else in this room, shifted, not disappearing, not breaking, but opening, just enough to let something else in, something real, something unplanned, something human. "You do not belong to this world," he said finally, and there was no rejection in it, no dismissal, just truth. And I nodded, because I understood that now, more than ever. "I never did," I replied softly, "but that does not mean I cannot stand in it." And the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything we had not said, everything we had just realized, everything that would come after this moment whether we were ready for it or not. And as I stood there, no longer questioning why I had stayed, no longer wondering if I should leave, I understood something I would carry long after this night ended. He ruled a world, built on distance and control, but for the first time, he had allowed someone to step inside it without fear. And that was the moment his world began to change, not because he lost power, but because he chose to see something beyond it.